Well, hello and welcome out to A Goodman's Tale. My name is Joshua Goodman and I am your host today. As you know, as always, if you enjoy these, we ask that you would share, and you would subscribe, help get the word out of what we're doing here at A Goodman's Tale. A Goodman's Tale is a place where we can, just get down to the nitty gritty, where we can tell our stories, the good, the bad, the ups, the downs, life's greatest victories and our greatest tragedies. It's a place where we can be fair, we can be open, we can be clear, we can be honest about some of the more difficult times, some of the more passionate times that we all experience. Anyway, with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Today, I want to bring you across the world to Russia. They're coming up in the 80s. There's nothing that was quite scarier than the Russians. They had this kind of growl, sort of intense talk. I am Russian and I will kill you, and goodness sake, just looking at a brief view of Russian history, we know that Kievan Rus was a Viking who was founded. Kievan Rus was not a Viking, but the Vikings founded Kievan Rus in 862 AD. Vladimir the Great comes to rule in Kievan Rus. Christianity comes to Russia. The Mongols invade Rus again, which will grow into the name Russia. We see Ivan the Terrible reigning in the 1500s, the Romanovs coming into power for the next 300 years in the 1600s, wherewith we see Peter the Great being one of the great czars of that time. And then finally, Catherine the Great comes to rule in the 1700s, having, of course, we know 3 children. One would rule Russia, one would rule England, and one would rule Germany. And at that point, we enter into World War I. World War I, really, we see, goodness sake, the loss of power on behalf of the Tsar at the time, Nikolai II. And really, this gives rise to the power of the Soviet Party. This also taking place because of the death of Rasputin in 1916. The Tsar finally advocating his throne to Lenin and the Soviet Party in 1917. This leads just kind of to a steamroll effect where Lenin executes Nikolai II in 1918. And then finally the death of Lenin in 1924, where I can say I've been there. He is entombed in Red Square, where literally we are in 2022 right now. So for just about 100 years, Lenin has been entombed, where you can see him in a glass case, his body laid to rest there in Red Square. From Lenin, Stalin takes power in 1924, and I mean, he has this stiff Soviet rule, really just taking a firm hand over Russia, understanding that at this time, too, Russia expands to not just be Russia, but to be the entire USSR, or the Soviet Union, to include what I call the stands, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan. All of these are part of Russia at the time. The Ukraine is, of course, part of Russia at the time. And really, this is the era even of Cold War that I grew up in. I was born in 1973. And I grew up with movies that told me nuclear holocaust was imminent. People during those days were building large bunkers in their basements in the anticipation of nuclear fallout. And really, Russia during this Cold War time, like I said, this is where my concept of that Russian ruler, really comes to bear. The movies I grew up with, all talked about how, we were going to nuke them, they were going to nuke us. And really, just a great, I don't want to say fear, kind of fear, but this anticipation that nuclear fallout was going to literally take place. And the funny thing, not funny, but tragic thing is that we see Chernobyl taking place in 1986, where there's this nuclear meltdown, and literally to this day, very few people live in Chernobyl because of the nuclear fallout that took place there. And this is where we really, come into kind of like my story. In 1985, Gorbachev comes to power, and in almost direct opposition or different viewpoint than rulers like Lenin or Stalin, Gorbachev, or as we called him when I was a kid, Gorby, really enters into the Soviet Party with this idea of huge reforms. He sees the need. Almost in a biblical prophetic portion, he knows that this arms race that has been taking place, this buildup of nuclear weapons, he sees the writing on the wall, knows that his country can no longer bear the financial strain of doing these things. And he is looking for a way to really just bring about great reforms to the entire Soviet Union. He begins to do that in the late 80s, and he brings to bear reforms that we come to know as perestroika, glasnost. These reforms are for one, where my portion of the story comes into new religious freedoms, but also greater clarity with the government and access to the press and just all sorts of stuff. It is a new day of Russian reform. And as part of these Russian reforms, the government says it is once again legal to bring Christianity and Bibles into Russia. Keep in mind that up until this point, we had what we called back in those days God smugglers. And these men, women would carry just suitcases full of Bibles incognito as contraband, knowing that if they were to be found out, then, these Russian military police, these Ruskies, right, would arrest them and they'd be thrown into a Russian gulag and probably never seen or heard from again. At least that's the concept we had. I don't know that would actually take place. And going into Russia after these reforms, here we are flying from Finland into Russia and carrying these Bibles. And the first place we would fly into would be St. Petersburg. But St. Petersburg in those days was Leningrad. And even before Leningrad was Leningrad, it was Petrograd. And so when they renamed Petrograd to Leningrad, after Lenin, of course, Petro being Peter, thus the name St. Petersburg after it was renamed once again. And man, what a interesting time. I'll never forget flying in to Leningrad and first standing in front of those KGB-looking Moscow Russian soldiers with like AK-47s or something, and whatever they were, M16s, I don't know, but man, their big brimmed hats, walking into the airport, into customs, into immigration, and then having, this dark looking Russian soldier, let me look into your bag. And man, I must have been 16 years old and a little worried, right? What if these reforms weren't true? What if the stories of my childhood have all come to bear, and now I'm the one, this Russian soldier's going to open my suitcase, he's going to see the Bibles, and I'm going to be the one thrown into the Russian gulag, the prison. I'm going to be tortured and interrogated and whatever. And man, to get up, you stand in front of him to open the suitcase, all the Bibles laid out there. I tell you what, it almost feels like during the 80s and 90s being a crack dealer coming in through the Miami airport, knowing you got all this coke and you're opening the bag and there's all your illegal contraband. That's the way I felt, right? It's like in a story of Miami Vice, except I'm dealing in Bibles. We open the bag up and the Russian looks in. Okay, no problem. Closes the bag and sends us on their way. Man, whoo, what a sigh of relief. they were now once again allowing Bibles to come in to Russia. Because understand that this opens the next 10 days, it opens the door to what we're going to be doing in Russia. By day, visiting places like the Hermitage, and then also, where's the other place we visited? Not just the Hermitage, but the Petrov Museum, which was one of the palaces of Catherine the Great. All these gold-coated domes and beautiful art. I mean, it was a tremendous, tremendous tour of history and learning the depth. I mean, my perception at this time is changing, because learning the depth of history and the greatness of individuals like Ivan and Catherine and and the wishing that Nikolai II had more strength to put down the Communist Party and to stand his ground as Tsar. And again, just this rich history that Russia has, dating all the way back to 800 A.D. and my eyes being open to that great history. And then at night, we're stalking the streets, handing out Bibles. And there's a little old lady we handed a Bible to, and she took it and she held it close to her heart. She began to weep, because it had been, almost 70 years since there was any level of freedom of religion. And now, once again, it was legal for her to hold this Bible and to be free to worship as she desired. And so, just like I said, just a great time. We went from Leningrad or St. Petersburg next off to Kiev, where I had for the very first time an international dish we've all heard of, chicken Kiev, which is basically a chicken breast that had been stuffed with butter and battered and deep fried. And one of the things they say is be careful when you cut it open, because the butter is so hot on the inside, it will scald you. And so you got to kind of poke a hole in it first, let it drain out a little bit. First time I'd ever been to a 5-star restaurant. And then again, after we go to this 5-star restaurant, to the museums of the day, we once again hit the streets handing out Bibles and meeting underground preachers who are now free, individuals who had been in prison for 10, 20, 30 years for their faith, meeting these individuals, them weeping at the thought of these new religious freedoms that they had not ever experienced before. Just what a great time. We go next from Kiev to Moskva, to Moscow. And I'll never forget standing in Red Square, with the spherical buildings all around. And there you have the entombed Lenin, where, again, he's been entombed for like 100 years, laying, pale as a sheet, in stately dress. And just looking over him, and really brought me to the point of thinking about life. And this man, he had such an impact on the nation. He also had this huge impact on the world. He had a huge impact on me because I was a child of the 80s during this nuclear arms race, being in fear, in imminent fear always, that the Russians were going to attack and there would be nuclear fallout and all of these things. And this man who had lived 100 years ago, having had that impact, or 70 years ago, on my life at the time. Now I guess I'm thinking of when I was there in 89. It was late October when we flew in, and then it was around 70 years since his rule. But now today, of course, it's over 100 years ago. He died in 1924. And so, next year or the year after will be 100 years since the rule of Lenin. Then again, Stalin coming into power. After that, his starch rule. And just the impact that these two men indirectly and directly had on my life. As I stood over this entombed body of Lenin, I thought, this individual, having had such an impact, and it's weird, right? Because I'm able to, at that time, I'm 16 years old or something, I'm able to visually see this man who 70 years earlier, now 100 years earlier, and even still today, this 100 years has gone by, and the impact that this individual, I could see him and consider the impact, really a negative impact, right? Because I grew up in fear of the nuclear holocaust, the negative impact that this individual was able to have on me, and me living literally across the world from this guy. And, you know, we look at things even like the Cuban Missile Crises and, you know, being on high alert for all of that time. And again, me staring down at Lenin's entombed body and really just considering the impact that this man had on my life. And then taking that a step further, right? Because this really had an impact on me. And I really believe it shaped my perception of missions, because I considered, as I stood over Lenin looking at him, I considered that this man and the impact he had to put to death Nikolai II, the Tsar at the time, and his family, right? The negative impact of this country of just great beauty and great history, and literally bringing it, because of the Communist Party, to a point of financial ruin and bankruptcy and breadlines and all this stuff. Go back and look at the history. It's incredibly fascinating. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, man, if this individual could rise to such a place of prominence and power, and have such an impact to the negative, then what kind of impact? And it was great because I was on this trip to Russia with my dad. Like I said, I was around 16, which would have put him at around 36 years of age. And I believe this was a conversation we had as we stood over the entombed Lenin, and we talked about the impact. We talked about the nuclear holocaust and perception, all of these things. And if this individual could have such an impact to the negative, what kind of impact could we have to the positive? Man. And I still kind of just stand in awe of that thought. You know, later on during the trip, here we are in Moscow, we're finishing up the trip, and we're riding the subways under Moscow, and man, we're bonkers, we're crazy. I consider it now, and I'm like, we're in a foreign land, we're in stinking Russia, we're riding on these subways under Russia, and the beauty of the halls, and the gold inlaid stuff, just it was unbelievably beautiful. And we don't speak, I mean, I know how to say like Slava Bogo and Do Svidanya, and, you know, just like 3 or 4 words. And here we are, not speaking the language, not having any English in any of the tubes, right? Any of the subways. And yet, you know, trying to figure out where we're going, how we're going to get there, which subway goes to which place. And we actually run across this college student. I actually think, you know, his name may have just been Ivan. And Ivan, the college student, he begins to speak to us. He's taking Russian or English in college, and so he begins to talk to us in his Russian accent, you know. And, you like a pizza? Pizza's good. Yeah, I take you to the best pizza place in all of Moscow. I think to myself, I'm like, we could have been kidnapped, you know, held for ransom or whatever. At least that's what the movies told us. And so we take a chance. It's late at night. We go with Ivan to experience for the first time ever Moscow pigeon pizza. Yes, you heard me right. Pigeon pizza. And their pigeon pizza even had corn on it. And again, me and my dad were just looking at each other and kind of chuckling, because Ivan asked us, you got music, you got American music, yeah. And we just so happened to have this Phil Driscoll, The Power of Praise cassette with us. We hand it to him, and here we are jamming out to Phil Driscoll's Power of Praise, eating pigeon pizza in Lord knows where, Moscow. Man, what a crazy, incredible time. And the evening's done, and, you know, we also give the cassette to Ivan and a Bible and tell him we're going to be praying for him. He's very respectful, very thankful, and it was a once in a lifetime night. It was just, wow, it was incredible. And then November 9th came, right? We'd been there 10 days, and we are flying back through Helsinki, Finland, Moscow to Helsinki, and I'll never forget that it was November 9th, because November 9th is kind of an infamous day. Maybe not as large as days like Pearl Harbor or 9/11, but November 9th was the day the Berlin Wall came down. And never forget the infamous speech of President Reagan saying, "Gorbachev, tear down that wall." And lo and behold, the people did. They tore down the wall that separated East and West Berlin. And really, there was a cascading event in history that took place, and I won't keep you much longer. But there was a cascading event that took place because as Gorbachev, maybe a little too late, tears down the wall and enacts the perestroika and glasnost and all these things, we see portions of the Soviet Union begin to break apart. The USSR, all of the stands beginning to, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all of the stands beginning to break off, Ukraine beginning to break off from the USSR and stand and establish their own personal independent states once again. The Soviet states of Russia had, almost been cut like nearly in half over the course of the next few years. And these countries once again beginning to seize their own identity. Now you look at what's taking place currently, Russia attacking the Ukraine. In 1989, that wasn't taking place because Ukraine was run by the Soviet Union. And wow, the Berlin Wall, what was known as the Iron Curtain, came tumbling down. And years later, we would make more trips to Russia and bring MTS and partner with what was once the underground church and have just such a great impact, bringing ministry training school there, and just, great stuff. And really just stopping and considering again that pivotal life moment. I mean, you consider, and I'm going to finish the story now, but stop and consider, right? That man all those years ago could have such an impact on one nation. What impact could you have? I've had an impact on a lot of people, and part of the impact I've had on the people I've had it on was because of that moment standing over Lenin's tomb in Red Square. And today I want to let you know, man, you too can have a huge impact in your words, in your actions, in your tenacity, not being willing to step down or back down. Yeah, so with that being said, if you've enjoyed the story, like, share, subscribe, and just go out there and live life with all you've got.